Yes, I want to look at this story that was on Channel 7, and I'm just going to go to that now. And the story was about this, I'll knock you out, Melbourne police slam after violent arrest on Facebook Live. Now my question here that we have the Commissioner of Police of Melbourne and
Police have defended their actions after a violent arrest at a McDonald's drive-through. The suspect has told 7 News they were heavy-handed and picked on him for having a nice car and a beard. But Victoria Police says officers shouldn't have to put up with assaults and abuse.
Okay, we just hear there that Channel 7 News just was saying that police do not have to put up with violence or abuse. We talk about domestic violence laws. We talk about the one-punch laws. Is it acceptable for a Victorian police officer to be, for us to condone the police's behaviour? I believe the police were heavy-handed, and I believe if the Commissioner of Police is actually saying that domestic violence and this sort of violence from police officers is acceptable, then what sort of example are we setting in Victoria? Basically, we have the police defending to the point that it's okay for police officers to behave like this. We need a Premier of Victoria to stand up and say that domestic violence, any sort of violence, whether it is from police officers or whether it's from anyone, is not acceptable in the state of Victoria. The question is that when this man was on the ground, you have a female officer continuing to spray capsicum spray in his face. What I don't understand is why can they behave like this? Why are they allowed to use violence? And why is the Victorian Police and the Minister for Police and also the Commissioner of Police is condoning violence from the Victorian Police? The simple fact is I believe that we are having an out of control situation in Victoria. We're having a police state where that it is okay for Victorian Police to be acting as such as a police state. I see that there is a case for racism and for them behaving in a way that is unacceptable. It's to the point that it is racism. Not everybody that looks different does not equal a terrorist. Not everybody that looks different or a different race equals a terrorist. We all have human rights and we all have rights. As far as I'm concerned, how can we set the example, the Victorian Police set the example to actual behaving in this mannerism? Police officers can be seen shotting into 21-year-old's face before taking him to the ground. Why are they allowed to punch? Why are they allowed to use violence? My question is that the Victorian Police and the Minister for Police, and I'm sure the Minister for Police Victoria would be saying we're not condoning this behaviour. How can the police minister or the Commissioner of Police condone domestic violence and violence against the general public by police officers? Does this set a policy that somehow this is acceptable? I can see that there is discrimination, and I can see that there are some serious issues with the Victorian Police. You drive a nice car, you look like somebody from the Middle East, it gives the right for the police to harass you, it gives the right for the police to discriminate against you, and it gives the right for police to vilify you. The question is, there are police procedures and proper procedures. My question is, if this was a serious search and seize of a vehicle, then why did they not have the perpetrator handcuffed? They didn't have him handcuffed. We see that a police officer actually pushes and shoves and assaults him. What for and what reason, I don't know. But what I can understand is that we see a issue of discrimination, racism, vilification. And I suggest that we need to set an example to the Victorian police, and that is number one. Particularly, they do not want what happened in Sydney with the Canterbury riots on a race issue. This may happen in Melbourne because you have a police minister and the Premier of Victoria saying that, okay, everyone in Victoria is not allowed to use violence towards anyone. But as the Victorian police, it's quite acceptable for police to use violence towards other people. The question is that I do know from experience that you do not need to use violence to control a person. Violence and aggression should be the last resort, and it is not on. Here we have the person in hospital. Here we have police officers using excessive force to pin a person down. And that woman that you see in that photo there, she then, why they've got him pinned down to the ground, has to use excessive force and use capsicum spray in his face. All I can say is to the Victorian government, the Victorian Police Commissioner, and also the Minister for Police and the Commissioner of Police, is this the sort of environment that you want set for the example to your young officers, that violence is the first resort, not the last resort? It's not about justifying the police's behaviour. It's not about that. You know, just because the Victorian police who said they're fed up with abuse does not mean they have to abuse a person back or use violence towards a member of the public. That is not their job to do that. But if we have the Victorian Police, Commissioner of Police, and the Minister for Police, and the Premier of Police, the Premier of Victoria, saying that we will set a policy, and that is Victoria Police that are fed up with abuse, it's okay to send an example back to the general public that police have the powers to abuse you back and to assault you and get away with it. The question is that the Victorian people, and I think out of this Mohammed Tlaib, you need to form a committee, you need to form a group of people, and you need to protest, and you need to go and march on Parliament House and get your point across that police violence and intimidation and victimisation is unacceptable. And just because you drive an expensive car and you look different does not mean the right to behave in a way that causes fear and intimidation by police. The police are victimising you. The police are discriminating against you. They're being racist. And I believe that you do have a case in the Anti-Discrimination Commission, because at the end of the day, the question that I would ask is that if this was a serious problem, a very serious issue, then what should have happened is you would have been in handcuffs well and truly beforehand. But they didn't have you in handcuffs. They allowed you to walk around. They allowed you to do whatever. And the only time they had you in handcuffs is when they decided to have a fight with you. Now, at the end of the day, I can't really see how you can be charged for assault when there was nothing of that going on at all. As far as I'm concerned, there is harassment and there is police victimisation. There's also discrimination. And what are we teaching our young police officers in the Victorian Police Academy? That people that fit a certain profile, you're allowed to discriminate against them, you're allowed to victimise them, and you're allowed to assault them, and you'll get away with it because you're a Victorian police. What I would say, I send a message to the Minister of Police and the Commissioner of Police and the Premier of Victoria. We're talking about one-punch laws, we're talking about violence, we're talking about domestic violence. And what do? You condone police officers using violence against members of the public of Victoria because you say, the police say, we're fed up with abuse, so you're going to form a policy in the Victorian government that police have special powers because they're fed up with the abuse, that it is okay for police members to attack and threaten and injure. And Superintendent Stuart Bateston, which is mentioned here, which is mentioned in this news article, which you see our members go to work every day to protect the community, and they should not be expected to be assaulted or threatened or injured, Superintendent Stuart Bateson said. From what I have seen, they've acted opportunity within the bounds of their duty. The bounds of the Victorian Police duty is not to use violence, not to use assaults. So my question to the Minister of Police and the Commissioner of Police and the Premier of this state of Victoria, that Superintendent Stuart Bateson, there needs to be a full review, a full audit and a full royal investigation that why can superintendents encourage their officers, their members, to behave violence towards people. Now, if you went to court as a general member of the Victorian people and said, well, I'm fed up with the abuse that I'm getting in society, so it's okay for me to go and assault people, it's okay for me to go and do that. Well, what sort of precedence is the Victorian Police setting when it comes to the members of Victorian? The Victorian Police are setting a very dangerous precedent, and that is, we can go around assaulting people because we're fed up with abuse from the members of the public. Where does that say in police legislation or the policy and procedures? Where does it say that? It doesn't say that at all. And what I would say to Mohammed Talab is that you need to make your complaints as high as the United Nations, and you need to make sure that your voice is heard, and you need not to be threatened or feel in fear of Victorian police being bullies, assaulting you. I mean, at the end of the day, the video basically shows, and here we have Superintendent Stuart Bateson actually agreeing that it's okay for Victorian police officers to use violence to assault the members of public because they are police officers and they have the right to do that. I'm sure from my understanding of this whole matter that I originally saw it on Facebook is that Superintendent Stuart Bateson is saying that I will teach my young police officers that it is acceptable to use force and violence against the members of public, even though it puts them in hospital, and even though it is excessive force and is just not acceptable. I think at the end of the day that this matter needs a full royal commission, and we need to start having control. And this is coming from the Premier of the state of Victoria right down to the Commissioner and the Police Minister and Commissioner of Police, that we will not condone violence within the Victorian Police Force. You do not condone violence in the workforce, you do not condone violence in schools, you do not condone violence against women or men, but you say that it's okay for Victorian police to behave in a violent manner and an assault manner because they are fed up with the abuse. Is this what you're training your police to do? Oh, we're fed up with the abuse, this is how we will treat people. What I would say that this is racial vilification. And I would tell all people right around the world and also people of Victoria that you need to stand up against racial vilification, racial profile. See, the Victorian police, they have been trained, and most of them have, is called racial profile. If you fit a certain profile and you look like a terrorist or you look like somebody dangerous, they believe that they can step outside of their job, though they're in their job, and harass you for no good reason. Now, at the end of the day, I think, how safe is this country when you have police officers forming a racial vilifications, racial profile against Australian people? My understanding is, I don't know the full facts, but my understanding is that I believe these officers are racial, and I believe that Superintendent Stuart Bateson is actually setting an example to Victorian police that it is okay to assault people. It is okay to behave this way, and it is okay to treat people against their human rights, and it's okay to actually break the law, though they say they're not breaking the law, but they are breaking the law because they are police officers, and when they step outside their uniform, they're actually just members of the public. What sort of example are we setting for Victorian people? How can Victorian people be safe on the street knowing that we have a superintendent, Stuart Batesman, that says, if my officers in a police station want to kick a person's head in, I'm going to accept that because they can come up with the argument that they're fed up with the abuse. Two wrongs don't make a right here. And what I would say, two wrongs do not make a right. Violence does not resolve violence by using violence back. At the end of the day, the only way to resolve this issue is that we need an example set within any police force, whether it's Victorian Police Force, Queensland, New South Wales or WA, that violence from the members of the police force of that state is not acceptable. Just because you get annoyed, just because you get upset, just because you have a problem, it does not mean that you take it out on members of the public. And I would say to Mohammed Tlaib's family that you have a right to actually sue the Victorian government. You have a right to take a human rights case against the Victorian government, and you have a right to have this fully investigated. And I would urge you just to think about this one, that the police are using racial profiling. And also what the police are also using is another form of intelligence, and that is terrorism-related profiling. So it's also racial profiling and terrorism-related profiling. If you fit that profile, they think they have the right to behave in a certain way. So if most Victorians start looking like Saddam bin Laden, then does it give them the right to go and assault you? No, it doesn't. You have the rights and the freedoms of free Australian people to actually be yourselves, do what you want to do in this country without the intimidation, without the threats, without the vilification, and your human rights being broken by Victorian police or any other law enforcement. At the end of the day, we have the Australian Constitution in this country, and that Australian Constitution is for all Australians. Every single Australian. And what I would say to Mr. Tlaib, you take a human rights breach against the Victorian government. You sue the Victorian government and you make it clear that you will not tolerate victimisation, racial profiling from the police, and also looking at just because you are different. It does not give the Victorian police the right or the power to do what they're doing. And I think it's shame on the Victorian government, shame on the Minister for Police for setting an example and allowing Superintendent Stuart Batesman to say it is acceptable to assault and threaten the members of community because the only way is to protect our police officers. At the end of the day, it's very, very wrong. And I think that at the end of the day, I urge Mohammed Tlaib and to the Tlaib family, I give my condolences, and at the end of the day, I would urge you: one, take this matter to the United Nations. Tell the United Nations that you wish for this matter to be heard by the United Nations, and basically breach the Australian government and the Victorian government on the fact that they have breached United Nations human rights laws by excessive force. In America, when this happens to a African Negro American, that the police shoot them on the street, it usually causes a protest and it usually causes unrest. What I would say to Tlaib is that you need to join with your brothers and sisters and basically set a committee up of people, discuss this, do things civilly in a civil, quiet protest, march upon the Australian Melbourne Parliament and say that we have rights. Just because we look different, just because we are from different nationalities, different backgrounds, it does not give Victorian police the right to vilify people. It does not give them a right just because you have a good-looking car or you have a beard. I have a beard, but it doesn't matter. The fact is, the police have overstood the mark. And the thing is, what I do not understand is how does Superintendent Stuart Batesman decide to say that Our members go out to work every day to protect the community and they should not expect to be assaulted and threatened or injured. Well, Superintendent Batesman said. Well, let's rephrase it. Our members go out to work every day to protect the community and they should not be expected to be assaulted or threatened or injured. So, Superintendent Stuart Batesman indirectly is saying what? That it is okay for our members to assault the public of Victoria. It's okay that the members do not restrain themselves or have the ability to step back, but it's okay for our officers by Superintendent Stuart Batesman to say it's okay for this sort of behaviour by the members of the Police of Victoria. What I would urge Mohammed Taleb's family to do is to sue the Victorian government, and also that's a civil suit. And also make an example that just because you come from a different nationality and a different place and that you are Australian citizen in this country, that they can't have police going around doing this behaviour. It's unacceptable. Here you've got this woman, you've got this person here and this person here just behaving wrongfully. I believe it's provocation when it comes to the police. And as it says here, I'm doing a roadside inspection. I told you you're going to obstruct me from doing my job. And then it says, I'll fucking knock you out, brother. Bro, I told you. One police officer can be heard shouting as an altercation blew up. When altercations blow up, it doesn't automatically say or condone police to use assault. You can actually restrain a person without assaulting them or without causing injury. At the end of the day, it is better to talk and it's better to sort this out than to sort this out. You know, at the end of the day, I find this very disturbing and very wrong. And I'm hoping the Taleb family will go and find a lawyer or a barrister, sue the Victorian police for what they have done, make an example out of this, go to Parliament House in Victoria, with all your different nationalities of multicultural and etc. of different countries, and protest against the government and says we will not tolerate police discriminating, victimising and racial profiling, and also what they call terrorism racial profiling. So if you look like a terrorist, it sort of gives the police the right to harass you. Well, no it doesn't. And I'm very sad day of Victoria behaving like this. So I'm just going to continue to play this.
This is the moment a Friday night McDonald's run turned violent.
Look, I'm doing a roadside inspection. I've told you. Are you going to obstruct me from doing my job?
4 police officers pinned 21-year-old Fady Taleb to the ground as diners watched on. And a friend started live streaming on Facebook. As they struggled to put handcuffs on him, police copped a barrage of abuse. Fady is today in Footscray Hospital. He claims he suffered neck, rib and arm injuries after the scuffle at Altona North.
They just pushed me out of the way, get held by 4 cops, and start getting hit by one of the cops.
Fady was waiting for food when officers approached, wanting to inspect his Mercedes.
Maybe because I was driving a nice car or something. I don't know, maybe because I don't like to talk like this, but maybe because I got a beard.
His brother Mohammed saw the video online and rushed to the scene. A female officer used capsicum spray to try to bring the situation under control.
Shocked, to be honest, especially that coming from the police. Pretty much basically they're helping us.
But Victoria Police say 3 of their officers were injured too.
Our members go to work every day trying to protect the community, and they should not be expected to be assaulted or threatened or injured.
The brothers are both facing charges, including assault police. Victoria Police have defended their actions, saying they shouldn't have to deal with abuse on the job.
From what I have seen, they acted appropriately and within the bounds of their duty.
Come June, you will find out what the truth will eventually come out, and then you'll see who was right and who was wrong then.
Jodie Lee, 7 News.
See, what I do not understand is this is very wrong behaviour of the Victorian police. The police there are lots of precedents in Victoria that if you are a certain race or you belong to a certain group, well, certain things won't be dropped. You know, one law for one and another law for another. What I do understand is this is just appalling by the Victorian Police. It is a sad day when we have Superintendent Stuart Batesman said, from what I've seen, they've acted appropriate within the bounds of their duty. Their bounds of their duty is that they only can use appropriate force if the other person is using the same sort of force. I don't see that happening. What I see happening is an officer has provoked and is actually using provocation against this person. And then what has happened is basically they have stepped over the mark. And Superintendent Stuart Batesman, what I do not understand is you are acting inappropriate to the Victorian residents of Victoria, because what you're saying is that the police are fed up with the abuse in Victoria, so they have the right and they are somewhat exempt from domestic violence laws, from one-punch laws, and from basically violence and bulliness. It's okay for the police to do it, but it is not okay for the members of the public. The police must set the example. The police must send the correct message, and that is, we will act accordingly to the law and to our duties. And if you look at the legislation of the Police Powers and Responsibility Act, the Move On laws and etc., what I do not understand is, this is not how we want a police force to behave. We're not a police state. And what I would say to Mohammed Tlaib and his brother is that you need to make action. Placard Parliament House, placard the district office of your area. Tell the police, bring out the people and basically tell them that enough is enough. March on the streets. Because you know what? The police are out of control to the point. We've only just seen that in Melbourne recently. Police couldn't stop a certain thing outside of the city, but allowed it to come into the city to cause trouble and mayhem. At the end of the day, what I accuse the Victorian Police is using violence. They are using provocation. They are being racial vilification. They are racial profiling. And they're also using what we call terrorism racial profiling. So if you fit that terrorism racial profile as a terrorist, because there is terrorism profiling, then what happens is they think they can step over the mark. I think at the end of the day that we have a Victorian Police out of control. Superintendent Stuart Batesman is actually condoning police using violence. That is a sad day that when we have Superintendent Stuart Batesman saying it is okay to use violence. And if Superintendent Stuart Batesman had a family member and the Victorian Police was using violence on his own family members, he wouldn't condone it. But because it's not his own family or his relatives or what have you, it's okay to use violence against Victorian residents? I don't think so. The problem here is we're going to have such as called trial by media, and we also will not have a fair trial because of trial by media. What I would say to Fady Taylor, what I would be saying is exercise your rights, stand up, and do not allow these bastards to be dishonest. Keep the bastards honest. And at the end of the day, stand up for your rights. Remember Nelson Mandela. Remember Martin Luther King Jr. They stood up for the rights of their people as well as all the other downtrodden and people that were being stood on. At the end of the day, we can see that in certain American states, the police were using heavy-handed. And do you know what? The people won in the long run, and the police had to admit they were at fault. So at the end of the day, what I would say is enough is enough. We need to stop this sort of behaviour by the Victorian Police. We need to set the example that police do not have the authority to go up and victimise people, use racial profiling, and also what I call an anti-terrorism or a terrorism profiling that somehow one of these police officers obviously are using. What I do not understand is I don't believe for 1 minute that any of these people are terrorist, but maybe the police assume that. And I think that at the end of the day, all these people are Australian citizens from what I know. And at the end of the day, enough is enough. Shame on Superintendent Stuart Batesman for even condoning his officers using violence. It is not on, it is not acceptable. So the simple fact is, enough is enough. Let's stop this carnage. Let's stop these provocations by police. Police are not there to assault the public. They are not there to provoke the public. They are there to do their job. And what I do not understand is that we have a Superintendent Stuart Batesman that says, oh, well, the community can suffer under my command because I'm not going to tolerate abuse from the public. At the end of the day, what happens if you got somebody that has a disability? Where's the Disability Act? Under the Disability Act, you have the Disability Action Plan. Apparently, even the Victorian Police don't even follow their own legislations or the Victorian government legislations. So what I would say is shame on the police of Victoria, and I'm hoping that the Taleb family will stand up to the Victorian Police, organise a committee people, about 10 or 20 people, start discussing, start preparing. What you see here, angry protest over plans to deregulate the taxi industry. You know, if that was all you guys getting together like the Cronulla riots had happened, and I don't want to see that, but what I want to see is a peaceful protest. A protest like this was happening at Melbourne Parliament House. That's what you can do, Taleb family. You can send a message to the Premier of Victoria, and you can also send a message that we will not tolerate domestic violence and violence in our own families and our own group of people, but we will not tolerate this. And we're not going to tolerate it from the Victorian Police, and we're not going to accept this sort of violence from the Victorian Police. It is outright violence, and I believe it's just not acceptable. And I would also say that these people did not have a warrant or exercising a warrant. They were just going on their own situation. What I do not understand is enough is enough. I think the police were heavy-handed, and I think technically I believe that the Taleb family have more than enough rights to go to United Nations with the United Nations case against the Victorian government and the Victorian Police, and they should start set an example, because you know what? This is what we saw in Sydney. We saw this in Sydney, and we saw this with the Cronulla riots, that the New South Wales Police were just just stepping over that mark just too much. And at the end of the day, enough is enough. Let's bring about peace. Let's bring about a understanding that we can't go around racial profiling people, and we can't go around also profiling people on the fact of because they drive a nice car or what have you. I can see that there is racism, there's discrimination, there's human rights breaches, and there are so many breaches, it's not funny. Here we have the police wasting taxpayers' money. Here we have the police making decisions to waste the Victorian taxpayers' money. And I believe that even the federal government and some of our federal members and senators should step in and say enough is enough. We don't need this sort of behaviour and violence from police officers. They are not exempt just because they are in a police uniform. What I would say to Taleb's family is fight the good fight. Do not become fearful of them. Do not allow them to intimidate you anymore. And basically stand on the grounds of Martin Luther King Jr., Nelson Mandela. He fought the good fight. They won by locking him up, by house arresting him, by putting him in jail. But at the end of the day, he won in the long run. Enough is enough. Send out the great message. Do what these angry protesters over plans to deregulate the taxi industry. There's the Melbourne Parliament. March against the police behaviour and tell the government that this is not acceptable for our people, and also every single other person in Victoria. This is not acceptable for the police to behave in this way. Thank you for listening, and I wish all the best for this good fight that's going to take part with the Talebs that enough is enough. This is completely wrong. This is completely unacceptable and actually goes against human rights. It is racial, it's racist, it is racist, it is a racial profiling, and as far as I'm concerned, this is unacceptable. We have the Victorian Police out of control. I'll leave it there.